All right, friends. Now we're on to our third animal podcast, our second process that we need to investigate how animals do it, and that is gas exchange. Uh, Gas exchange, we also know as respiration. Basically, for animals, what that means is taking oxygen in to their bodies and getting carbon dioxide out of their bodies. Okay. To do this requires the respiratory membranes to be moist and thin so that oxygen can literally dissolve in the liquid on their surface and be collected as they just diffuse, the molecules of oxygen just diffuse through a thin membrane into the lung. The trouble with this is that those thin, moist membranes get very easily lose water while they are collecting gases. So it's easy for them to get dried out. So we've got to deal with those two things. We need the oxygen, we need them, those membranes to be thin and moist, but we also don't want to lose water by evaporation. Okay. The requirements of gas exchange then are that you got to have a surface on your respiratory organs that's big enough to get enough oxygen to supply your entire body. So surface area, again, is going to be a really major concern. Do you have enough surface to actually collect enough oxygen for your body? Okay. Most of the time in living things, large surface areas are achieved by folding things, folding membranes. Okay. We see it over and over again. Gills of this clam here, the gills are folded membranes. So we're getting lots of surface area crammed into a tiny space. We see it in the crayfish that are in the classroom. We see their gills, again, are these folded structures. Over and over again, we see that, okay? And as we already said, another requirement is the gas exchange membranes, whatever they are, lungs, gills, whatever, they have to be moist. And that moisture is needed so the oxygen can dissolve on the surface, literally like in water. But the membranes also must be thin. So once it's dissolved, the oxygen can go through a very thin membrane and not have so far to travel, so that oxygen can diffuse into the respiratory organ cells. So again, the problem that this presents is very large for land animals. Okay, it is a huge problem that had to be conquered as animals made their way from water to land, much like plants made their way from water to land. Thin, moist membranes very easily lose water in this land environment. So natural selection favored organisms that could find a solution to that, solving that water loss problem, but still being able to breathe. Okay. So what are the ways that animals have found to get oxygen into their bodies? The first that is used by the most simple of animals is simple diffusion across the body surface. Okay, so that's the simplest method. No fancy respiratory organs are required. We see here a flatworm called a planarian. We'll be looking at those a little bit later on, actually. And basically, they have this. They're very tiny. We're talking a couple of centimeters long, maybe longer if they get stretched out. But their bodies are very flat, hence the name flatworms. Okay, and because their bodies are flat and thin, their body has a very broad surface area relative to the volume inside. And so they can take in enough oxygen just through their skin to service their entire body. So sponges do this as well. Cnidarians, which is the phylum name for the jellyfish, we'll talk more about that later, and the corals and things like that. And flatworms, and even segmented worms like earthworms do this. Okay, so simple diffusion. The most simple organisms in the animal kingdom say, hey, that's just fine with me. I don't need anything more sophisticated than that. Of course, all of these organisms live in water or liquid environments. Segmented worms, at least earthworms, live in soil, but they bury themselves and thus keep moist. If you see them out on the sidewalk, a segmented worm is not going to last very long out there because they'll dry out. All right, modes of gas exchange, gills. Okay, gills are a hugely important, a very, very, very efficient mode of gas exchange, of getting oxygen. Their job is to obtain oxygen, of course, from water specifically, and specifically for an organism that has a large body. If we go back here and look at simple diffusion, all of these organisms either have really small bodies or really simple bodies or both. Diffusion is not going to be sufficient for an organism with a really big body. You're not going to be able to get enough oxygen in through your skin to service a really big body. So gills are great for getting oxygen from water for organisms that have larger bodies, okay? But it only works if the respiratory organs, if the gills are constantly exposed to water. So this is a solely water-breathing organ. Again, we can see, if we look at this gill here on this fish, we can see the folds here that give it lots and lots of surface area. If you've ever had a crab, these are its gills right here. If you examine them closely, the next time you eat steamed crabs, if you ever eat those, you will see the folded gills. Those are the gills right there. All right, now, lungs are the solution for breathing on land. They're not the only solution, but they're one that we care about most. They obtain oxygen from the air. But again, the problem is you can't expose these tissues, this lung, this very delicate thin membrane moist tissue to air without expecting to get water loss. So what we mammals and other lung-using land animals do is we hide those breathing organs inside our body to try to minimize water loss. I mean, look back here at these gills. These gills are very open to the environment, because fish and other aquatic organisms don't have to worry about keeping their gills dry. They're in water all the time, okay? So with land animals, the solution has been to take those breathing organs and hide them inside the body to make it easier to keep the membrane moist and prevent water loss at the same time, okay? Now, it's also important to remember that in a respiratory system, gas exchange system is always closely tied, or usually closely tied, to a circulatory system. Because once you get the gas into the body, look over here. This is what you would see if you could microscopically look at your lung tissue. You would see that you have, your windpipe that breaks into two bronchi and goes into each lung, okay? But those bronchi split into smaller and smaller and smaller breathing tubes. And each breathing tube at its very end has these little grape-like air sacs called alveoli. So when you breathe, you are taking oxygen and sending it into these little baby balloons. But you don't want it to just stay in the little baby balloons in your lungs. You want it to go to your brain and your toes and your muscles and everywhere in your body to take oxygen to where it's needed, okay? So the respiratory system is really good at collecting the oxygen, but to get it where it needs to go, you need to couple it with a circulatory system that is going to pick it up from those air sacs and deliver it all over your body. So the air sacs receive the air, but these blood vessels that are on the outside receive by diffusion through those moist membranes, they receive the oxygen. It just comes to them right through the wall of the alveoli and into the capillaries, the blood vessels here, and then the blood vessels take it to wherever it needs to go. So blood vessels will take oxygen all over your body. So respiration and circulation go hand in hand. Truly, circulation goes hand in hand with everything. Digestion, obviously, if you're going to eat nutrients, you need those blood vessels to take all the nutrients where they need to go. So circulatory system is absolutely vital connection for all of these organ systems to various parts of your body. Okay, so that's it. Thanks for watching. That's your respiratory system, and I will see you in the next podcast.